All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the November 29th instance of the Gateway API Gamma meeting. We have an agenda today. I'm going to share my screen so you can see it. And today I will remember to blow up the size and shrink the window a bit so folks will be able to see. So yeah, we've got a couple of things. As many of you know, we didn't meet, all of you should know, we didn't meet last week because of the holiday. But to recap from meeting before last week, I wanted to close the loop on John's PR for namespace boundaries. Flynn told us to heckle him if he didn't review it, but I see some comments from him on here. So you've saved yourself from the heckling.
In fairness, I actually said I was going to review it last week or there would be heckling, and I did not, in fact, comment on it last week. So heckling may still be indicated. It's up to you.
I will choose not to heckle if you just decide to heckle in the chat. But yeah, we've got a lot of great comments on this. I will be fully transparent that between a week of PTO that I took last week and catching up on email and everything this week, I've lost a good bit of context on this. But I do think that we have general agreement on direction. It seems like a lot of folks are asking for enhancement on a couple of things where, hey, we want the to from dichotomy seems to be the big thing people are asking for. Service binding and the service projection alternative approaches were brought up. And this kind of falls in line with another topic on the agenda today. But, you know, there's been a couple other people for that functionality as well. This is my opinion. Because everything we're doing is provisional and experimental, I want to remind everybody that we do have the freedom to make changes. We do have the freedom to kind of overwrite some things. I want to get to some of the other agenda items to see how folks feel. But to kind of do a spoiler alert, I'd be interested to, to see where people are now on the service binding or binding HTTP route to service approach now versus previously. We had a lot of consensus before. It seems that as we spread the word to the community some more, there may be some less consensus at this point, and that might be worth considering. I don't want a bike shed for bike shedding's sake, but as we have more information, as we've kind of explored the limits of the approaches that we've taken, it might be worth reevaluating. So I'm going to continue to read up on this GEP. John, you've got a lot of feedback here, but it seems like we generally have good, we generally have agreement on this is a decent direction to go in. Want to ask you, I think I saw you on the call, John, if you have any more thoughts here. Oh wait, I forgot you. You might not be able to.
No, talk. I'm here now. Okay, but not later. Yeah, so I think it seems like there's general consensus that this is a problem we should solve, and potentially at least some consensus that this is fine for now. I don't think anyone, myself included, thinks this is the best option though. So I don't know. I mean, I'm fine like going with this for now and then trying to iterate on it, or spending a bit more time, before we merge anything, talking about it. But the consensus I've got, and I asked a few other people that hadn't given very explicit comments to give a more explicit comment, but was that we're kind of directionally aligned. We just need to fill in some of the gaps still, I think.
For what it's worth, my gut feeling is to go ahead and land it, start working with implementing it, and then, find out where some of the gaps land, find out where we find gaps, I think that feels more helpful to me than spending more time talking about it.
Yeah. So, yeah, John, you pinged me about having a look at this, and I did have a bit of a read of it today. Yeah, I agree with Flynn here. Like, I mean, you'll know that I definitely do I still have sort of worries about using the service as the binding point, but I think that the reason that I said let's go ahead anyway was that I think that at this point it's more useful to try something and see what those gaps are, like this sense, than to spend more time doing sort of design in the absence of praxis. And so I think, again, I'm kind of in favor here of using the rule. To summarize this, John, and correct me if I've got this way wrong, but I think that the key part here, the key part of all of this verbiage is that only one route applies. Like if there's the question that I had was, what happens if there's a HTTP route bound to a consumer route bound to a service, and then there's one that doesn't live in the same namespace, and then there's a producer route as well. What happens? And the TLDR here is only the consumer applies. I think that, as Flynn says, like, I suspect that that's not going to fly in the long term, like we all think, but like this sort of will at least let us get started on something. And I think that at this point, praxis is more important than perfection. Getting something done is better than arguing about what we should get done anymore. And I think Keith, you alluded to the fact that there were some questions in the API review about sort of, is binding to service a good idea? And I think that all of the reasons why I'm kind of about it, and I think that none of those reasons have changed, but I don't think that the other thing that I said have changed either. And so we should just go ahead for now. So I will put a comment on here to that effect, to be like, reservations, but let's go ahead with this for now, because as you said, Keith, this is experimental. It's all clearly marked as experimental. We are experimenting. If you're going to experiment, at some point you have to move from Gedanken experiments to actual physical experiments. Well, they're not physical, but you know what I mean, but actual experiments. You can't just do thought experiments forever. And I think that's the point that we're at now.
Yeah, well said. I've been kind of on the fence on this, and I know myself. I tend to have a bias towards perfection, which is a very painful bias to have at times. And what you said really resonates. And I'm inclined and happy to use the forward momentum that we have on this and just kind of say park those reservations. I'm glad we have it here in code review to refer to. And we can iterate and do something different for now. I think that's to piggyback. I think that the fact that we're not having to change the HTTP route resource is helpful in this experiment, because we don't have to deal with deprecating one set of changes or removing fields or anything like that. We are just adding semantics, and so this is the perfect time to kind of be slightly reckless with the approach that we're taking, because there's less to have to undo. So any last comments on this topic?
Yeah, so I think that the last thing I want to say is, I think that, as you said, not modifying HTTP route is one of the biggest advantages of doing this. Not needing to have another resource as a binding resource or something like that is another big advantage of this. So it lets us sort of play with the behavior a little bit without needing to go down a deep sort of design rabbit hole on like what would a binding resource look like, or what would a mesh route resource look like, or something like that, right? Like, I think that it's not possible to add a from and a to parent ref because of the implicit assumptions encoded in the fact that the current HTTP route is built for gateway and the from is anywhere. I don't think that we could really easily make that explicit without substantially changing the contract. And I really don't want to do that because people are already using HTTP route for ingress a lot. So like, I think that's, like I said, I think the fact that we're not changing HTTP route is a very big deal. And I think that we should strongly contraindicate any changes to HTTP route, because that's a relatively fixed API now, right? Like it's beta, it is heavily implemented. We can't change that now, not without like big shocks to the rest of the system.
I might actually strike the word relatively from relatively fixed in that sentence.
Sure. Yep. I mean, yeah, it's like it's not far. Like basically, the in my mind, the thing that's stopping it from being GA is not anything about features or anything for its north-south use case. It is just time and implementation and performance test coverage.
Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense to me. It's going to be interesting as far as HTTP route goes, because it feels like, we had an open question of, can we use the same routing resources to configure everything? And it feels like more and more that answer might be no, as we need to do more things. Like, it would be great to be able to delegate everything to the binding resource. But I suspect that we may run into some issues there as well. But I think that getting a bit not esoteric, but philosophical here. I think that the mission and the goal of Gamma still stands, even if we can't use the exact same HTTP route resources. We're just adding things to the same family of resources with the same semantics, the same definitions. And so if we have a HTTP route in a different group or a differently named resource or something, I think that that's still okay for the purposes of Gamma initiative and what it's here to do. So that makes sense to me.
We should. I feel like we should allow a short amount of time for people who are not me to comment. Sorry.
Fair enough. Yeah, good call. Any other comments here?
Sorry, I missed your last point. So you're saying the HTTP route is not sufficient, or is it something in case we run into a problem?
After looking at the feedback people are asking for, or the feedback inside the feedback, looking at the things people are asking for, the current use, like the current HTTP route resource with parent ref and ingress use case, it doesn't feel like it's sufficient for all of the granular control people are looking for from mesh. We could
agree, but we may need additional resources, we may need additional bindings, but it doesn't mean that for routing purpose we cannot use HTTP route.
I think I agree. Like I said, I think it's very there's stuff we could probably do with as far as pushing some of the functionality and logic into the binding resource. But I'm just kind of saying that was an early question in Gamma can we do everything in the same HTTP route resource? And it's looking like, no, not everything. There are enough, sufficiently enough use cases where we're going to break the bounds of HTTP route. So we're going to need something else. And I just kind of preparing ourselves for that reality and just wanting to help people, anybody who might be worried about, oh, did Gamma fail? No, it hasn't failed. The mission is still there. It's just going to, look like a couple extra resources in the group or things of that nature.
I completely agree. My concern is really to always, when we add resources, to make sure that Gamma, there is something that is specific to Gamma that requires us to add them to Gamma, and they do not apply to gateways, because a lot of the things that we may need are very likely to be common with gateway, like authorization. It's not clear yet who owns egress, but there are a lot of things that probably will be better shared. And if we can avoid adding anything specific to Gamma, that will still be ideal.
Agreed, but I think that the point that Keith was trying to make was that if we need a routing resource that has a from and a to, we can't use the HTTP route for that, right? And so there's a possibility that we might need like a separate routing resource that's very structurally similar to HTTP route. And I don't think that is 100% off the table. And that's what we're trying to say here, that the fact that it's not off the table. And so if you're thinking about something like that, then it's okay to talk about it, right? That's all.
Yeah, no,
It might also be the case that we get to use the same resource, but then there's some other resource that we attach to it or use to modify it. Who knows?
Sorry,
we need to figure that out. Go ahead, Kostin. Sorry.
Just going to say it's not, nothing is off the table, but should be a very high bar and should be very well justified, that and also evaluated if whatever you're describing does not apply to gateways, because gateways also have similar needs in many ways. I mean, from your example, it's kind of also specific to gateways. Anyway, I think we're in agreement. We're just using different words, but I think we're fine.
Yeah, I have to sum it up. I think that and this is the benefit of Gamma being so close to Gateway API is that we start with Gateway API and using the same resource. Like that's our starting point rather than innovating something separate. And if we need to divert, well, we've got documentation and justification for reasons for giving those reasons that people can look back on. But I think we worded it similarly in the original like goals gap of Gamma, where is literally opposites back to back, where we're not going to create new resources just for the sake of creating new resources. But we're also not going to force functionality into a Gateway API resource if we do need to break. We have to balance both of those things, but we always start with trying to use the same resource. And when we find the constraints, we pivot. Okay, great. Any last questions or comments before moving on to the next topic? Okay. I missed the meeting where in the actual Gateway API meeting where this was discussed, but I was a part of the API review meeting. It's very informative. I learned a lot from what Tim and Cal look at when they're reviewing APIs. It was fascinating. And we had like a small section toward the end to talk about the Gamma API specifically, and Tim Hawkins had a lot of questions, as I assumed he would, and some of the notes specifically are here in this document that I linked to in the agenda. But what I wanted to kind of talk about is this second point here, where there is some potentially related work happening already upstream in KK in Kubernetes repo of a KEP to potentially decouple the service resource. We've talked here in the past multiple times about how if you want to use service, but it's so dang coupled with all these with multiple concerns. It's an overloaded resource. It does DNS, it does endpoint management, it does service discovery in some sense, like as far as membership. And so in the past, when meshes have tried to add functionality to networking, it used the service resource to do all those various things. And the first point that Tim and Cal said was, wait, you're essentially rewriting the destination, like you're rewriting the set of endpoints. Like the endpoints resource for the user perspective now becomes meaningless because the mesh has now changed the destination of a request. And my response was, yes, that's what the mesh community has been expecting. Yes, it's what meshes do. It's what we've been doing for the last period of time, however long meshes have been around. And it's what our users expect at this point. And Tim's question was, okay, is there a way we can maybe make this more harmonious with the Kubernetes domain model of what resources are responsible for what parts of provisioning? And he talked about some potential work around a kind of like I forget the word he used, but like a shadow service or like an empty service that didn't have any endpoints. And all it did was reserve, that's the word. It just reserved an IP address, a stable IP address. So like the kind of the inverse of a headless service, if you will. And then could that be enough for a mesh to bind to? And the endpoints could be rewritten, or you could create your own phantom endpoints, like the mesh could start creating endpoints or whatever in the cluster to be consistent with it. Now there's some concerns around, okay, well, how do you get some of the load balancing policies in there? Maybe that can be, there can be like an external thing for that, but this is a very interesting work stream that if you've had similar opinions in the past, I know someone from our organization, Sean, had a doc that we talked about in one of these Gamma meetings about concerns around using service. And so it sounds like there's some desire in Kubernetes to do this, which is exciting for me personally, because when I was first working in mesh, the message I got was Kubernetes wants nothing to do with mesh. And I think that the work that we've done shows that the community wants it enough that there's enough of a use case and desire for us to work together on this and to kind of do this right. To quote Nick, who often says this, you usually get one chance to break the fundamental assumptions of your user. And I would love, I think this is the chance to do that. So
At most one, I think Nick said,
I mean,
actually.
at
Yeah,
most-
I think I did say that, but I think I missed a golden opportunity to make an Eminem reference there and say one shot, but sure.
See,
So
this is why
close.
we can't have nice things.
ahead.
Keith, did Tim say that anybody was already looking at this, or was he proposing this simply as a, a possibility?
Tim said that Antonio he called it Antonio's KEP. I did some digging and couldn't find a specific KEP already there. I found one that was kind of similar. I'm not sure if it's somewhat old. I think maybe a couple years, a year or two. The PR has been out there. So I don't know if there's been talk about pivoting that KEP or what, but I need to chat with Antonio to see what the status of that is.
I mean, it might be in the draft Google Doc stage like we do. Costin, sorry, you go.
Sure.
But I don't think that's a problem for us. I mean, we until it's ready, we go with service, and when it's ready, it's the same pattern. I mean, we attach to whatever they define. So we are perfectly aligned. Nobody likes service too much. We all understand that it has limitation, but practically speaking, for the next year or so, we'll have to deal with it.
Correct. And that's a really great point that I'm glad you brought up. Like, this doesn't change our direction. That's why I wanted to get the PR discussion out of there before talking about this. I don't think this changes the decisions that we make at this juncture, but I do think my purpose in telling people here is one, like, this is, for one reason, this is like the only space that I know of where I know of mesh experts and Kubernetes contributors kind of in the same space. And so I wanted to let this group of people know about this, because everybody, you're all brilliant. If you've got thoughts here or desire to invest in this, then let's continue to have these conversations. Tim wanted to continue to have these conversations, so I want to know who can be in that room. And the second thing, I guess I said the second thing, which was just to get people involved and get ideas out there.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
Lord knows I have opinions on this, so be happy to talk to folks about that. I know it's shocking that I would have opinions.
Flood opinions, never.
I
Sorry,
feel
go
like,
ahead.
yeah, Kevin, you undid your camera. Did you want to say something? Sorry,
No,
if not,
all good.
okay, cool,
No, I
cool,
was
cool.
just I was just listening earlier and wasn't at my computer. So
It's
Yeah,
always
yeah, fine.
nice. It's always nice to see.
Nice
you,
to
Kevin.
see people's face, but yeah,
yeah, thought I'd throw the video on even.
yeah, cool, cool.
No, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
We
good to see, man.
appreciate
Sorry, I didn't mean to make things weird.
All
Yeah,
good.
it's just sometimes people use the I am unmuting my video as a means to say hey, I would like to say something. So
Yeah,
sorry.
no, just showing them here.
Yeah, no, cool. That's awesome, and that's also okay. Sorry, I should probably maybe Keith. That's a thing that we should say at the start of the meeting. Like, feel free to have your video on or off as you wish. If you want to ask a question, if you want to say something, use the raise hand thing, and that way we can all be on the same page. Sorry, Keith. Sorry, Keith.
I used to say
All
that,
good.
but yeah, sorry.
Video is actually, it's really nice to be able to see people. So to the extent that people can turn their cameras on, I would really appreciate it. Recognizing, thank you, Costin, recognizing that it's not always possible for everybody, but oh man, it's so nice.
It's very nice for me as well, because because I'm in Australia, I don't get to see you all in person very often, so it's particularly nice for me.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Cool.
Susan.
Thanks.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
anyway,
don't feel like you
back-
have to. It's just nice. That's all.
Yeah. backing up to splitting service out and such. Yeah, I think that would certainly be an interesting thing to talk about. Lord knows there's other stuff that we've been kicking around at Buoyant, talking about policy versus routing, which I do not believe I can talk about coherently today, but there are bits of that are certainly raising questions about, all right, so is the service sufficient? Are we going to have to do something different? spoiler alert, Linkerd already does something different when you talk about policy. So, but like I said, I'm not yet in a position to be able to talk about that coherently here. So maybe next week.
Fair enough. Yeah, this is a exciting conversation, obviously. So if you've got thoughts, put in the doc, put it in Slack. Same channels apply.
In the meantime, Keith, are you trying to track down? Are you actually trying to have that chat with Antonio to see whether that KEP is alive or that sort of thing?
Tim asked Rob to push that forward.
All right, so I'll ping Rob on it then.
Yeah, soon after that meeting, again, I went on PTO and I'm trying to figure out which way is up right now. So I follow up and ping Rob as well. So hopefully we can continue to have that conversation. Any last comments on the splitting service out topic? All right, great. So next agenda item topic is a status update on another PR that John has open. I brought this up because I saw it flag the better term languaging, and I think it's actually a really important topic that I want to make. PR essentially talks about non-HTTP types. So we obviously decided we're going to start with HTTP route because it makes the most sense. And a lot of most of the use cases all in one swoop. But there are obviously other resources as well. I've seen this used in some places, but not others, but I like the X route convention for like TCP route, UDP route, TLS route, etc. And so this PR that John submitted basically just extends some of the same semantics that we discussed for HTTP route for the other ones. I left some comments. I wanted to get some more eyes on it from folks. The big open question for me is around collision and how do we resolve, and if there are HTTP routes for the same purposes as TCP routes, as UDP routes, as TLS routes. And so I think John and I had a sidebar about it a while ago. And I think that the thing that's missing here is probably just some precedence rules as far as which one is going to win. It's discouraged, and if you can avoid it, then don't do it. But obviously, right, if you've got a pod doing some kind of, I take DNS for example, that often listens to TCP and UDP on the same port. If you're doing something like that, then you're going to need some tie-breaking logic, and I think the precedence order is probably pretty straightforward. We take the one with the most information in most cases, but wanted to chat about it here, or if you want some time to stew on it, the PRs in the chat. Yeah, if you want to chat, I'll say it here. If you want to talk about it, then raise your hand or use the raise hands function in Zoom as the queue. So go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, so I would say my gut feeling would be that if we're going to have some sort of priority, it should be more specific beats less specific. That's generally a pretty good sort of guideline. Where here more specific is like higher up the stack. So like HTTP route beats TLS route beats TCP route and UDP route. TCP route and UDP route are relatively orthogonal, so maybe you can have some different rules about, but then both of them being allowed on the same service. But yeah, that's my sort of rough feeling.
I actually did some digging, and even though it's not documented anywhere, but the code in Kubernetes actually does prevent you from having. Hold on, before I say that, never mind, ignore that. I'm going to go back and look at that again, because I thought that TCP. Okay, you can't bind two TCP ports to the same number. That's what the rule is.
But also don't forget that HTTP3 is UDP. So HTTP route and UDP can conflict in that regard.
I don't know. So that's my other question. I don't know how Kubernetes is handling HTTP3 right now. I need to do some digging on that.
I can say with great confidence the Gateway API is not currently taking HTTP3 into consideration.
Kubernetes itself will allow you to basically set up a service on a UDP port, and so Ingress controllers can do that, but it's a little weird.
I would say that the API doesn't really care. It's HTTP route, so it's not specifying 1, 2, or 3, but implementations may vary based on what they're doing.
Yep, and we don't have HTTP3 as a field for protocol or for any of the other things yet. So yeah, that's what I mean by it doesn't take. Yeah, you're 100% right, Cost, and it would kind of work, but like, but we don't have specific directions about it. Is what I was saying.
What I meant is the protocol itself that do UDP. I mean, there are kind of discoveries and alternative, because in HTTP response you have a header specifying that HTTP3 is supported, and then client can update. So we don't necessarily need API level support, because the protocol itself can handshake 1 versus 2, and then via headers indicate 3 support. So protocols are also a way to indicate this without APIs being too specific. And especially since API, even if APIs say HTTP3, what if the client is saying HTTP1? So it's a bit more.
Yeah, but I think that the larger thing here is that it feels to me like a relatively simple guideline, like more specific beats least specific, is the sort of the goal that we should aim for, and that for conflict resolution. And then obviously the ins and outs and the hairy edge cases always get hairy, no matter what general guideline you have. But like, the more you can keep your general guideline nice and general, the smaller the edge cases become.
I'm generally happy to kind of defer to Gateway API for the ingress use case, and just say like HTTP3 is undefined for now, and that kind of that kind of kills the entire UDP route question.
I would rather say that HTTP is common, and it's up to protocol to negotiate the version and find a different solution, because it's very useful for the HTTP. From a technical perspective, there is nothing preventing HTTP3 to be used, and we don't want to confuse people about that HTTP3 is not supported for whatever reason. UDP, we can say that, if HTTP route is specified on a port, then it wins. That doesn't matter if UDP route is. I would rather have a problem with people having UDP and losing the UDP routes than confuse people saying that HTTP3 is not supported. It's an important protocol that we should strive to move towards.
H3
That's
is
fair. Yeah.
I mean, HTTP3 seems to be very important for the segment between the internet and the cluster. And, so for example, unless Envoy has changed this very, very recently, it does a fine job of terminating HTTP3, and it does not do a fine job of originating HTTP3 to an upstream service. I agree with the comment on 1492 to the tune of, I don't think any of the meshes deal with UDP right now, so they don't deal with HTTP3 either. Now, all that said, I'm totally on board with the idea that an HTTP route is by definition more specific than a TLS route or a UDP route or a TCP route. So I'm completely okay with that. It makes me a little nervous to say, oh, HTTP routes can, at the discretion of the implementation, be either TCP or UDP, but it doesn't make me concerned enough about it to disagree too much with that right now, I guess is the right way to put it.
Yeah, at least we don't support UDP, but there is some experimental for voice support of Quick, and then of course voice supports some ingress at least for Quick.
Yeah, I mean, I know there are Ingress controllers that already support it. Okay, I know there's at least one Ingress controller that already supports H3.
Yeah, so Micaiah in the chat says that the gateway listener can explicitly specify TCP and UDP. Yes, that is really helpful for like context propagation on the controller side for gateway. For mesh, it's we don't have listeners on a gateway, so it's slightly
Yeah.
less, slightly more difficult. And to my point earlier, when it comes to the service, or maybe Nick made that point, actually, the service resource, there's no, I don't believe there's even an app protocol for
Yeah.
H3 at the moment or Quick. So there's not a lot of information for the mesh to pull from to be able to snip the protocol. Might be
Well,
wrong though.
there's certainly an IANA standard for the protocol name. So that should be unambiguous, right? I mean, the fact that people are using HTTP / 1.1, right? Like we should actually adapt IANA as the baseline, and then some affordances for some legacy things that people have used in the past, specifically HTTP 1.1 and HTTP 1.0, but that should be it.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
So okay, I'm fine with that. I'm now placing myself in Flynn's camp where I've got some concerns about letting the protocol in or letting HTTP route be either TCP or UDP. I think that could get dicey, but I don't think we're far enough along to care too much about that right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you've got other thoughts, take a look at the GEP. I don't know if John's gone, but I'll follow up with him afterward and just kind of give the just see if we can get those precedence rules in the GEP. And I think this PR will be good from my end to deal with conflicts. Any last questions or comments here?
I need to finish reading the GEP, but nothing comes immediately to mind.
All right, moving on to the agenda. Yeah, wanted to check in on the milestone here. So we do have a Gamma milestone for HTTP routes to mark it as ready for implementers to try. Ideally, this would be finished and released in 070 of Gateway API. Target is about middle of the first half of next year. Ideally Q1, but holidays and things are always tricky. So first half of next year is kind of the current goal. And there are still a few of these issues that don't have anybody assigned to them. So if you've got bandwidth and interests, please feel free to assign yourself to them. I assign myself to Headless Services. So kind of the sub point that I have on the agenda is to talk about Headless Services if nobody else has anything. But before I do that and chat your ear off, I want to just kind of say this at the end of the planned agenda. If anybody has anything else before I go and pontificate about Headless Services in Gamma, then please speak now, raise your hand, or whatever, we can chat about it.
Everybody should check the notes that I just typed into the agenda doc about the status update on 1492 to find out if I put the wrong words into people's mouths or the group's collective mouths.
Will do. Here's something that I don't think we've done it in a little while. We've got some, I think I see maybe a couple of new faces here. If you want to come off mute and introduce yourself and let us know, why you're here, where you're from, what you're interested in, then please feel free to do so.
Yeah, I'll go. Hello, everybody. My name's Cage Kelly.
Hey,
Long and short of it, I'm kind of a nobody. So I'm just a systems engineer from the Midwest. I've been interested in DevOps and whatnot for the past couple of years, and finally got my way into a Kubernetes kind of gig. And we're using Istio, and somewhere reading all their documentation, I found about the API gateway, into the GitHub pages, and then found kind of this meeting, all the other meetings, and I'm really interested in this stuff, so I thought I'd join.
welcome.
Thank
Happy to have you.
Hi, I'm Liam. I joined 2 weeks ago, but I didn't say anything. I work at Tetrade. We work on kind of distributed STO and some other stuff around there. And mostly here just to keep an eye on what's going on, to see how we can kind of use the stuff and make sure that our stuff is going in the right direction.
Cool.
Thank
Hi
you.
guys, Gabriel here from Brazil. I'm just some end user guy watching what kind of things are happening in Kubernetes API and SIG projects. I've been trying to keep updated about the things that are happening here. And the company I work for use Consul as a service mesh, and we are implementing gateway API provided by Consul right now. So I'm just watching where the things are going and keep updated. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, never underestimate being an end user, mate. I
Yeah.
started out contributing to Kubernetes as an end user when I went along to SIG Federation meetings many years ago now.
Also, the end users are the ones that we really should be catering to all the time. So
We love end users. Really
Yeah.
appreciate you all doing this and taking the time to come chat with us. We really value your opinions and points of view. So,
Yep.
don't be shy if you see a doc and you say that doesn't seem quite right, or I use it this way, or ooh, we've got this really cool use case. Please share that with us. We would love to have your point of view and get some feedback on the things that we're trying to build.
Yeah, definitely. I joined 2 weeks ago, but that was the other time slot. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Thomas Eckert. I kept my camera off because I was eating dinner. Didn't want to subject you guys to that, you folks to that. And I work on the Consul API gateway at HashiCorp. So I work with Mike Morris. Mike is out today, so I came to just listen and learn. All right.
Happy to have you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Last call for introductions.
Going once, going twice. Okay, I guess we have to listen to Keith ramble about headless services now.
Yeah, now you just
Really
get me. Yeah, so an initial draft of the HTTP route GEP that Mike Morris put through, there was some language about headless services, but we stripped it out because we felt like it was a bit confusing and didn't want to lead anybody down the wrong path. And so this issue is created to kind of track the clarifying language and just to kind of figure out what do we think about headless services. I thought about this on and on a bit, and it's spent a decent amount of time thinking about it today. And I think I've got a gut feeling that I kind of want to share and get some feedback on, just to make sure that I don't, haven't completely lost it. I've got it in a different tab here. Here you go. So, my gut feeling, there's questions about, okay, should parent ref be, for headless services, should the parent ref be the stateful set? Should it be something different? And my kind of POV is like the headless service, that the parent ref should be the service, like that's consistent from an API perspective. Even from the Kubernetes networking perspective, even though it's a pod IP, like the headless service selector still collects the endpoints. So we want that to be the thing, binding to, that's being bound to. There we go. Implementations in general, I think this is probably a should. Thought about making this a must, but this is probably a should. Maintain Kubernetes behavior when it comes to stateful headless services. So it should, when making a request to a headless service via a mesh with Gamma gateway APIs, the same Kubernetes expectations should apply when it comes to load balancing and things of that nature. In the edge case, because John quoted as laying out an edge case here that I've personally dealt with on OSM, When you've got two headless services for a single pod, it's impossible to distinguish which service it belongs to. And in those cases, I think that this is a case where explicitly making behavior undefined might make sense. Where implementations can pick one, but it's up to the implementation to decide how to handle that. It's my personal preference, because one, I think undefined behavior can be a forcing function away from people doing things. And two, I think that different implementations, depending on the data plane, might have the ability to do some more complex matching and tracing or what have you. So I don't know, that's just my gut check. And now Flynn and Nick have lined up to tell me why I'm wrong. So go ahead.
I was going to say, I think Nick got his hand up before I did. I'm not quite sure about that.
You go first, mate.
So this dovetails into some of the stuff about policy that I am not really in a position to really talk about cogently yet. But the short version of that is that you get into some really nasty stuff with respect to policy if you decide to just say, oh, this is undefined. It feels to me that you rapidly land in a place where if you try to switch meshes, you can end up with things that behave radically differently. If you decide to change the way your ingress routes, then you can suddenly see radically different behaviors. Because there are ingresses out there that can switch between routing to the name of a service or routing to an individual endpoint of a service. So it makes me quite nervous to declare that to be a deliberately undefined problem. John also pointed out in the chat actually, I guess that's not the one in the chat. I saw it on there somewheres, but the issue where if you have two different headless services that both end up mapping to the same set or an overlapping set of endpoints, then your life can get really complex too. So I'm nervous about calling that undefined.
And to be fair, I'm only saying, oh, sorry, you're done.
It feels a little bit more like we might need to leave headless services until after we have a non-ambiguous way to refer to a backend or something along those lines. Go ahead, Nick.
So all I was going to say was that we already have a way to talk about undefined behavior in the Gateway API. We call it implementation specific support. That clarifies the thing that Flynn was saying about portability between implementations. Things that have implementation specific support, you can do them whatever way you like, but you cannot port them between implementations. So that's what I would, if you do want to do something like this, I would recommend saying that, binding a route to a headless service is implementation specific support. That means
I like that better than calling it undefined.
Yeah, so that means you can't mandate behavior in a conformance test. If you do want to have mandated behavior in a conformance test, that makes it extended. In that you don't have to do it. But if you can't mandate behavior for conformance tests, that's implementation specific. Sorry, Lewis.
Yeah, Flynn, coming back to your point about policy, if I was reading between the lines, I would say you were inferring that there was going to be policy from a security perspective attached to a service. And obviously, right, if we were doing that with headless services, that would cause ambiguity, to say the least.
It would be interesting.
/ dangerous. Probably how we would best describe it. So I do think we need to get into the weeds on that. Obviously, the alternative here is to say it's forbidden, right, until we know what it should be. So I think that's really the only choice, right, undefined or forbidden. At least at this version of the spec. It's easier to make things less restrictive.
Later.
I'm okay with calling it implementation specific as opposed to undefined at this juncture. Because the difference there to me is important. One of them you're saying we don't know what's going to happen, and the other one you're saying the implementation gets to explicitly decide what's going to happen, and you don't get to rely on it being the same between implementations.
I'm fine with that as well. Like and for what it's worth, I was trying to. I don't think I did a good job of laying this out, but the only thing that I think is implementation specific is the overlapping endpoint to headless services. But I'm also personally fine with making all headless services implementation specific. I don't think we lose too much by doing that. The alternative is to say implementation should maintain Kubernetes behavior like as a baseline, which I think most do anyway. But for the overlapping edge case, we say that is undefined / implementation specific. And implementation may forbid it is another, is something, another dimension of that problem as well.
Yeah, I'm fine with implementation specific. I mean, well, I think it's probably more likely to be feedback back to the service API proposal.
Yeah.
But there's only so much we can do if the endpoint's ambiguous.
Yeah, I mean, I think implementation specific behavior clearly includes being able to say, we don't do this. And like,
Yep.
I mean, to be honest, I would probably do that. In those implementations, just be like, yeah, look, we just don't do that. That's dumb. Don't do it. Yeah.
Right. I think right now right now OSM does that because we're just like, we're going to focus on other things right now. Yeah, but I want to go back right quick. Louis, you mentioned the service API proposal. Do you know if that's anywhere public or in a CAP PR somewhere?
I don't off the top of my head, but I'll certainly follow up on it because I'm deeply interested as well.
Got it.
I don't know if you were listening in, Louis, but there were a number of us who were acknowledging that we had opinions there and would be quite interested in talking to folks further about it.
Yeah. I've been here the whole time. We're doing this in Costin's phone, which is somewhat hilarious.
Holding back a joke. Okay. So this, if this seems cool with people, I'll just basically amend this to say implementation specific. Do we have strong opinions about saying that implementation should maintain Kubernetes behavior for stateful set, or sorry, for headless services, and then just making the edge case implementation specific? Or do you think all headless service functionality should be implementation specific? And the key here, I think, as Nick pointed out, is going to be conformance tests. What are we going to buy on performance tests?
Yeah, so that is the defining thing about the different levels of support, is how conformance tested they are. Implementation specific is defined as there are no conformance tests for this. Extended is there are conformance tests, but you don't have to run them. And core is you have to run these conformance tests.
Yes. And Flynn, did I hear you say that you were voting for the latter?
I would vote for headless services or implementation specific at this point. I don't.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's not a hill upon which I'm willing to die. That's just my gut feel is that there's enough stuff there that it would be easy to find that we're painting ourselves into a corner a little bit too early. And if we say implementation specific at the beginning, then it gives us more of an opportunity to play with it and see how it falls out. It's, not two thumbs way up or anything like that. Just kind of like, yeah, I think that's how I'd vote.
Gotcha. The painting yourself in a corner argument is interesting because I think, so from my perspective, the reason for not making everything implementation specific at the outset, and oh wow, we are nearly out of time. But my thought process on that was just trying to maintain the user experience of, oh, I put a mesh on my cluster. Now my headless services are all acting up. And so that's why maybe it's a should, but I'm also sensitive to the fact that not every mesh that wants to be conformant with Gateway API at any point in time can do that. can handle that.
Yeah.
So extended at the would be the, I wouldn't say it's core, but extended might make sense for that. I'll do some more thinking on that.
Yeah, I mean, extended might make sense. It would be. Well, we are just about out of time, so maybe we should continue this asynchronously.
Yeah,
I think that's probably
let's
a good idea. Yeah.
let's do that.
Actually, there's one question in chat which I'd love a clarification on before we bail. If we say implementation specific now, does a change to extended or core, is that a breaking change or not? I'm looking at you, Nick, although you probably
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
see
I'm just thinking. So we haven't had this come up much, but it is intended that implementation specific can become extended when you pick a specific implementation thing and make it extended. But like, so like maybe we could have, I mean, I think that things that were implementation specific would have a very hard time ever becoming core because the implementation specific stuff is going to stick around. But an implementation specific, like a specific implementation could become extended by having conformance tests and sort of be the blessed way to do it. And then so, like there is an extended behavior that you don't have to opt into, and you can still do the old implementation specific behavior. This hasn't come up before, but I think that's probably how we would handle it. It's a very, it's kind of a breaking change, but like we haven't had it come up much yet. But that's a very good point, Micaiah. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks to both of you.
Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you, Micaiah, for bringing that up. So yeah, we'll continue discussion on this asynchronously. I'll try and remember to post a Slack message, or at least get something in the agenda for it. But thank you all for attending. Next Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Everybody take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.